Hey guys, today my channel has broken 4,000 subscribers mark and I've played a game almost like a computer to celebrate this. to be honest, I didn't know that this threshold has been achieved today while I was playing, but I was trying to play my best because after 2 losses in a row, I was struggling with 3 out of 6 points in Group A of the Yurtayev Memorial in Kyrgyzstan. So check out the previous recaps if you haven't. There were lots of interesting games. I've defeated a FIDE master, the rating favorite. Then I've lost to a couple of prodigies. Then there were a couple of veterans. And today I played another prodigy who was playing with white pieces against me. He is rated around 1950 ELO and he is from Uzbekistan. And his name is quite complicated to remember. Muhammadiso Ubaidullayev. Hope that I'm pronouncing this correctly. And he prepared the opening that I usually play, the French defense, and he played the same variation that was played against me by a senior player who lost to me in an endgame. And he also exchanged all the pieces and went to an endgame in a slightly different variation. Probably he wanted to trick me in an endgame, but I wanted to trick him in an endgame. So let's see what happened. So this is the opening. I'm playing with the black pieces. This is all theory. And here, normally, people take with the bishop. And I was prepared to take back with the pawn. This is the variation that Alexander Morozevich, one of the strongest ever players. He's a Russian player, now retired. He used to be 2800, one of the strongest players in the world. And he played this. It's an interesting variation to play for the win with black. Imbalanced, black gets damaged pawn structure. Charlie, what are you doing? And black gets the 2 bishops combo. But this is a double-edged position. Well, maybe I should make a video on it. If you want, drop a comment. But nobody plays this against me in this tournament. Everybody wants to trade all the pieces. So this guy, Muhammadiso, also traded everything. And he went for the same position that occurred 3 rounds ago in my game against a senior player. That player traded here, and this completely allowed me to equalize out of the opening. But my young opponent found, probably has prepared and found a better move here, queen e2. So the idea is that if I take, he takes with a check, and this is a fork, and I lose the b7 pawn, and white is much better. So of course I don't take, I castle here. And now he castles, he first takes and then castles long. So that was his preparation. He blitzed out all these moves. Apparently, this is a better version than what happened in my game a couple of rounds ago, a couple of rounds before, because if he trades the queens, his king is closer to the center, as opposed to if he had castled short, as my previous opponent did. So that's the improvement. And also probably in some variations, white can attack on the king side because we have the opposite side castling, but I can attack on the queen side. And I was looking forward to this. I didn't want to trade the queens. I wanted to attack. I wanted to play for a win. So I took, and I went knight b6 to improve my knight. You know, my coach likes to say the first thing you have to do once you're out of the opening is to improve your knight, because knights, when they are on bad squares, the whole position is bad, usually. And if your knights are on good squares, probably you have a good position. Well, of course, you should also mind the safety of the king and stuff like that, but it's all obvious. The knights thing is less obvious. So I want to put my knight on probably d5, which is the best square for it. If the queens are on, white will never go c4 to dislodge this knight, because then the knight goes to b4 and pressures the king, and maybe the queen joins. and ice the king, and it will get nasty. So this is my plan if the queens are on and I want to attack. I want to also add some rooks to the attack, but my opponent surprisingly didn't want to do that. Initiate his attack. He wanted to trade the queens and go into a better endgame. If I take, for example, he's slightly better because his position is slightly more active. This knight is more active. These rooks will double up. I didn't want to trade the queens, so I went queen g6. So my plan is to put the rook on the c file to pressure the c2 pawn. For example, if he does nothing, like let's say h4. That's not nothing because this has some ideas. Of course, I cannot take because rook g1, and then the g7 square is under attack and I will get mated or lose my queen. So I won't take the g2 pawn here. Of course, I want to go rook c8 and threaten mate in 1. And if white does nothing, like c3, for example, I have knight c4, taking the queen, activating. This is what could have happened here. But he did not go for those sharp lines. He went queen g3. He insisted that we trade the queens. Okay. You know, if you're playing with the black pieces, this is the problem. You cannot dictate how the game unfolds in the opening because you go second. And if your opponent desperately wants to trade the queens, he will do that if he's playing with the white pieces. So that's the problem. So what's going on here in this position? We have a similar imbalance as was witnessed in the game 3 rounds ago. Again, check it out. The link will be in the description. So I have 4 pawns on the king side versus 3 pawns of white, whereas white has the pawn majority on the queen side. And our plans, logically, would be to advance the pawns for me on the king side, for him on the queen side. Whoever gets to queen first wins. But obviously this is a dead draw because if we both play precisely, because it's not easy to advance the pawns, and rook endgames are notoriously drawish. But white is a little bit better here because white can double up the rooks and infiltrate on this file. Later on, maybe put the knight on d7 and then put one of the rooks on the 7th rank, and it might get ugly for me. So actually the best move here would be to trade at least one pair of rooks. For example, here, trading one pair of rooks is better for me. I realized it only later on. I decided that I don't have to rush with it. I went f6, which is in principle a logical move. I want to restrict the knight. I want to disallow the knight from going to either of those squares. Also, I want to advance my e-pawn because as I told you, I want to advance. But I neglected some opportunities that he might have. He goes rook d6, all logical. I go e5 as planned to disallow the knight from going to d4 and later on to b5 or f5 or e6. But he doubles up now. And once I come with my king, I want to come here and probably trade the rooks, and then there will be the knight endgame where I might have some chances to play for a win. But he finds this clever maneuver, knight d2. And now, initially, I thought about going here, and trading everything. But then I realized that with shock that I lose a pawn here because he goes knight d6. Attacking this pawn, I have to defend, but then he has knight e8 check with a fork. So I lose the pawn. So I either lose this pawn or I lose the g7 pawn, which is bad news for me. So I cannot trade the rooks, and I will have to tolerate his activity on the d file, his pressure here. So I decided to go rook c8 here because I anticipated him going knight e4. And I thought he'll later on probably want to go here to pressure my b7 pawn. So I want to prevent that. And also probably in some future, I will be able to go rook c4 to pressure him. Here I cannot go rook c4 because this fails to some tactics. Rook takes b6. And if I take, this is a fork and I lose. And if I take here, he takes with check and I also lose a couple of pawns. So here I cannot go rook c4, but I can go king e7 first, preparing for that. And here he goes b3, preventing rook c4. And here my position starts getting a little bit uncomfortable, but for one opportunity, which I do not miss. As I told you, I was playing almost like a computer in this game with accuracy of 92% according to the engine. So here I find a great resource, f5. So I want to dislodge the knight, because otherwise what white can do, for example, if I do nothing, if I go like, I don't know, rook e8, white can go back with a rook and then put the knight on d6, and it will get unpleasant for me. It will be a great outpost. And again, I cannot trade, because after all the trades, the knight will again jump to d6 and fork me after, or not just fork me, but just outright win this pawn. So I have to prevent this. I have to play actively here. I don't have the luxury of waiting. So I go f5, kicking him from the e4 square. The only move is knight g5. And here I have to be careful. Of course, if I go h6, I hang mate in one. Rook e6 is checkmate, because this rook and this knight do a great job of taking the squares from my king. But of course, I calculated that I go rook f6, and this is the move that equalizes here for black. Again, my doc is trying to help me with this video. So he has to trade. Basically, well, he can go back, but then I'll just kick. If he goes back, I'll kick his knight away and I'm fine. So he trades. And here, initially, while going for this variation, I thought I could take with a king, but then I decided, you know what, he can go f4 and it's kind of unpleasant. So the idea is that he cannot take this pawn, because king g6 and the knight has no moves. All the squares are taken. He has to defend the knight, but then rook h8 and it's his pin and the knight gets lost. So that would have been great, but once I take with the king, he's not obliged to take the pawn, obviously. He can go f4, and this is the move that made me reconsider and take with the pawn. Because now he is threatening to take, because now he has the g5 square for the knight. For example, if I do nothing, he takes with check, and he can drop back and he's up a pawn. And I didn't like this f4 idea, and also he is threatening a rook d6 check, infiltrating, and I didn't like this. Turns out I'm perfectly fine after h6 according to the computer. Knight f3, e4, knight e5 is around equal, even with a slight edge for black, but at the time I didn't understand this. I didn't realize this, so I decided, you know what? I'll take with a pawn, not with a queen, with a king. Because again, he cannot take on h7, his knight will get stranded, rook h8 for example, and it's not coming out anytime soon. So he has to drop back. And yes, I've damaged my pawn structure, but I'm very active, and this pawn mass in the center is doing a great job restricting his knight, and also it will sometime later advance, and I will try to create a passed pawn, because this is the plan. As I told you, I have to create a passed pawn on the king side, he has to create a passed pawn on the queen side, and for the time being, my pawns are more advanced than his. So I go king e6. Here I came up with a clever idea, I think. I thought at the time. It was not very much praised by the computer, but it's not horrible either. So the idea is to sacrifice the h7 pawn, because I anticipated rook h1 with a threat of taking the pawn. And here I wanted to just give him that pawn, because I like sacrificing even in endgames. So my plan was to go first knight d5, and once he takes my pawn, I go knight b4. So let me show this variation on the board. Knight d5 takes knight b4. So I'm attacking the c2 pawn, I'm attacking the a2 pawn, but most importantly, I'm threatening knight d3 with a fork and taking the f2 pawn. This pawn is more important to me because it prevents my e pawn from advancing, and I want to queen, and I want to have a passed pawn. I'm willing to sacrifice some material to create this opportunity for myself. So here, I thought that after knight b4, this move, he can take on b7, but I'll check him from d3. And again, he cannot take because my rook is on c8. So he has to move, for example, to, let's say, d2. And I take this pawn. And if he takes this pawn, I have another fork, winning another pawn. He drops back, I take, and then my pawn marches. And yes, he's up a pawn, but I have good chances, actually. The computer says white is slightly better, but anyone can win this. It's a 3-result game. So that is what I wanted to do initially. But from afar, I first didn't see his possible response, but then I saw that he can, okay, take, knight b4. He, instead of taking my b7 pawn, he can go knight e1, protecting both the c2 square and the d3 square. So there's no longer a check on d3, winning the f2 pawn, which is what I wanted to win. Okay, I can take on a2, but he goes king b2, knight c3, and then he can take on b7. Actually, here I have knight d1, another fork that I didn't see at the time. So I can still win this f2 pawn, but he can, instead of taking on b7, he can do something else like knight d3. And he's a little bit better because I don't win any kingside pawn of his, and I don't form a passed pawn. And he will win some of my pawns, and probably he will be the first to create a passed pawn. So this is the problem. So because of the knight e1 move, here, knight b4, knight e1, I decided against going for this. So my plan of going knight d5, actually it was one of the best moves in the position, but not the best one. But I decided, you know what, I can go e4, first kick his knight away. And once it checks me, I go forward with my king, because the king should be an important piece in endgames. It should be active, it should be centralized. He has to drop back, and now I can go knight d5. And now his knight can no longer go to e1, because that's not a legal move. So that was my idea. Turns out I'm stupid. This is the only real mistake in the game that I made, because here white can get a winning advantage if white takes. I was intending to go here, white can take here, and I was intending to either check him, winning this pawn, or to take on c2, and both of those moves lead to advantage for white. Almost a winning advantage. Amazingly, I didn't realize this at the time. So if this check, then here, here, and he has rook e7 check, and then he makes me leave this central square, and then he takes, and the king is too centralized. It disallows me from advancing my passed pawn. So this is winning for white. Better is to take this pawn, but again, this is not what I want. I did not want his queenside pawns. I wanted this pawn, f2 pawn. Those pawns are my targets, because I want to create a passed pawn. And here I don't create it, so he can do many things. For example, rook b5, and he's much better here. So thankfully, he did not go for this. He respected me too much. He thought that my plan is good with knight b4, and he went a3, prophylaxis. But this gave me time to defend my pawn, rook c7. Now I defended it because I had nothing else to do. And I decided, okay, you know what, the game continues. At the time, I didn't know that white is a little bit better. I thought that maybe I can play for a win. So I decided, okay, let's see. He goes rook h5, and his threat is g4. And here I calculated for some time going e3. This is a logical move, because if he takes, I take with a knight, and this pawn is hanging, and also this pawn is hanging, and suddenly I'm a little bit better even, or it's close to equal, the computer says, but in some variations I'm better. It's equal only if white makes some only moves. So that would be great. But I thought that after e3, which is what I initially wanted to do, he has g4, and I didn't like this variation. So let me show you what I calculated. e3, g4 takes rook f5 check, forking. And once I go back, for example, if I go here, knight d4 check is very strong, so I have to go here. And here he can take the pawn, which is good enough, but he can also go c4, for example. This I didn't see, actually. I thought he'll just take the pawn. But this is equal, because knight e3 forks two of those pawns. But I didn't like this position also, because I won't get a passed pawn, even in this best case scenario. For example, here. I have those h and f pawns. He has the g pawn, which stops both of them from being a passed pawn, because they cannot advance, because they will get taken. So strategically, I've not used the opportunity to create a passed pawn, which is all that matters in this endgame. So I didn't like this variation. Turns out the computer finds even better options like c4 first, and once the knight moves, then take it with a check, and taken here, and white is 2 pawns up. But black has some compensation and can play for a draw, but not for a win. So, okay, black can take one of the pawns, by the way, so white will be 1 pawn up. But still, I didn't want to go for such positions, so I didn't go e3. I went rook g7, preventing g4, because g4 was his idea here. This is why you go rook h5 to pin the pawn and then go in g4. Here he goes f4 check, which is a committal decision, but logical. The computer says that c4 would be better, but still f4 is also logical. So if I go back, for example, here, I lose this pawn, which is not good. If I go back to e6, I fall threat of this check, and this is even worse. This pawn will fall also. So after f4, en passant is practically forced, as the connoisseurs of chess know. There is a meme about en passant being a forced move. So here it is a forced move indeed. So I have to take en passant. He takes. And this helps him straighten up his pawn structure and damages my pawn structure, but I was relying on dynamic factors in the position, such as piece activity. And my pieces are very active, and I put my knight on e3, which is a brilliant place for this knight. He cannot activate the king because knight f1 would be a fork, and I will win a pawn. And also I have the idea of going rook d7. So I was anticipating g4, and if he goes g4, I go rook d7. And I give him this f5 pawn, whatever, you can take this pawn, because I will check him. And then go rook d2. That was my idea. And black is better. Black is playing for a win here, because my pieces are so active, it doesn't matter that he took just 1 pawn. I will win it back, and then I will win back some more material. So because of that, he cannot go g4 in this position. It's not a good move. So what should he do? Here he thought for like 15 minutes, and he was getting low on time already. But he found the move that I considered the best at the time. He went c3. So the idea of c3 is to block the d file with knight d4, and now I can no longer infiltrate. Turns out the computer believes that c3 is not the best move. The best move here would be rook h1. And white is better long term because of those horrible pawns. And they will not advance. And yes, my king is active, but it cannot advance because all those squares are taken by the knight or the pawns. And I cannot make any forward progress, whereas white will gradually make progress, going king here, c4, maybe advancing some pawns, maybe later on defending the pawn and activating the knight, or putting on d4, and white can play for a win, squeezing in the style of Magnus, but my opponent did not see that. He saw only c3, just like me. And here I spent also almost all my time. I had like 10 minutes on the clock after finishing my thought process here. And I didn't find anything better than repetition of moves. And actually the computer agrees. I cannot make any forward progress. I wanted to sidestep this spin initially, because now he wants to go g4. And rook d7 will not work because of knight d4. So I wanted to sidestep this spin and go, for example, king d6, but this just, I didn't like it. He can do whatever he wants. He can go knight d4, for example, or he can go rook here, the computer believes it's a good move, well, or even rook h1 is good. And I'm not making any progress. Going backwards is never a good idea, practically never a good idea. You should be more active in such positions. So going backwards is out of the question, but what can I do? I don't see any good move. And the computer, neither does the computer. So I decided, okay, I'll go rook d7, he blocks, and now I go rook c7, attacking the pawn, and he has nothing better than a move repetition, because if he goes king b2, I have a fork, and I win the c3 pawn, and suddenly I'm playing for a win. If he goes here king d2, I have knight f1, forking him and winning the g3 pawn, and I'm playing for a win. So he cannot go to d2, he cannot go to b2 to protect the pawn, he can only protect it with the knight, and then I go rook d7 again, threatening the infiltration. He has to block again, I go rook c7, he goes knight e2, and we agree to a draw because this is a threefold repetition of moves. Unfortunately, I could not break through, but objectively speaking, chess is a drawn game, and we both played at 92% accuracy, almost like computers this game, so it's a logical result in this case. After 7 rounds, I'm on 3.5 points, 50%. I hope that I can get some wins in the last 2 rounds, tomorrow and the day after tomorrow. Stay tuned for the recaps, and please, if you like my channel, recommend it to your friends, to fellow chess lovers, because 4,000 followers is good, 4,000 subscribers is good, but I want more, and this content I think deserves more. Don't you? See you in the next one.